Hello and welcome to the Politics of Peterborough, the podcast where I chat with the people who have been elected to make decisions about our city and those who try to influence them. I'm your host, Dave Adcock. If you have any suggestions as to who you'd like to listen to on a future episode of the podcast, or have any questions you'd like to put to my guests, you can get in touch via Facebook or X at politicspboro, or send an email to politics.peterborough@hotmail.com. On with the show. My guest for this episode was born and raised in Norfolk before studying modern history at the University of Cambridge. He spent 3 years working for Ford Motor Company before entering St Stephen's House, Oxford, to study theology. Since being ordained as a priest in 1985, he's worked across the country from Essex, Chelmsford and London before spending 14 years as the Dean of Newcastle. In 2018, he was installed as the Dean of Peterborough. The Very Reverend Chris Dalliston, welcome to the Politics of Peterborough.
Thank you. Good to be here.
What was it that drew you to the church and a life of ministry?
Gosh, I think I've always been very, people-focused. I wanted to make a difference to the world. Didn't grow up in a religious household, actually. It was something I came to a bit later on in life. I think at one point I was thinking maybe politics, maybe on the other side of things, drama, that kind of stuff. A bit of an actor monkey, well, of course that suits dressing up in robes and performing every Sunday. But mainly I think because I wanted to try and help people, actually. That was really what it was about. And I thought that the way of faith was one way of giving people value, meaning, purpose in life. It certainly had begun to mean something special to me, so I wanted to kind of share that with others, really.
How do you define your role as the Dean of Peterborough? What does that entail?
Gosh, quite a bit of everything. Obviously, the principal role is to oversee the work of the cathedral, to see the cathedral both as an institution, as a place of worship, as a historic asset for not just for the city, but for the country, really, because it's a major and important building. So to kind of oversee all that, its common life, to make sure it's sustainable, it's fulfilling its kind of fundamental role as a place of worship, but also a place of hospitality and welcome. And then it's also to work alongside the bishop, because I'm the senior priest of the diocese, and so I'm on the bishop's senior team. Diocese of Peterborough covers the whole of Northamptonshire and Rutland, as well as the soak of Peterborough, as it were. So actually, we're in the top corner, but having a role throughout the diocese in terms of helping the church, kind of face the challenges of the contemporary society and, be part of that leadership team and helping the bishop shape her direction. And obviously holding the cathedral church, as a place of gathering for the diocese and for her to exercise her ministry from. So, yeah, it's a very, very varied role. CEO in a dog collar is one way they describe it, but yeah.
You spent 14 years as the Dean of Newcastle. What was it that drew you to Peterborough?
An email, really. Literally. When I was aware, obviously being a dean in the wider church, that Peterborough Cathedral was in a bit of a financial crisis, to put it mildly, and that the dean had left and everything else. And I remember thinking to myself, as I progressed things up in Newcastle, well, pity the poor person to take that job on. Then it's a tricky ask at the moment, and then you get an email from the sort of one of the senior people in the Church of England saying, Dean of Peterborough, was the title. I remember reading it and thinking, and being asked to be considered for the role, to put my name into the ring, into the hat, as it were, for potential appointment to the role. So, as it were, quite reluctantly at that point, I thought, oh gosh, this is I've had some challenges, but this looks like a big one. But I came down here to meet people and to explore and to talk it through as one of the options. I just fell in love with it immediately, and I thought, it's just a stunning place. I mean, I've been to Peterborough, and being an East Anglian by upbringing and so on, so I knew it a little bit, having had a parish in Lincolnshire, not so far away in Boston. But it wasn't a place I'd really kind of explored properly. And when I came down here, and I thought, God, this place ought to fly, ought to be singing, not sort of sobbing and crying, So yeah, I decided that I would go forward for that, and as things unfolded, here I am,
Do you feel that religion is necessary for a healthy society?
Oh, I think human beings are spiritual beings, and that, I mean, we often talk about religion and spirituality as if they're two different things. Religion is only a kind of structured way of living the spiritual life. And of course, there are all sorts of different religions, and we run different paths in life, different ways in which we can, live out our understanding of both of ourselves and our place in the wider universe. But it's that big picture stuff. I think that's what religion is about. It's about what is our meaning, what is our destiny, what is the the things that shape our lives as human beings, enrich us, and inspire us, and guide us, give us a kind of pathway. And I think we all need some sort of pathway. So for me, it's been a very important thing. I think people actually, I think Christianity has shaped people's self-understanding, and even in a society where it's less kind of lived out formally, I think some of those patterns of living are still very much embedded in people's hearts and minds.
Would you still call the United Kingdom a Christian country?
Well, yes, I would actually, fundamentally, because I think, as I said, I think people have, continued to walk in those patterns, and people used to say, kind of slightly apologetically, I don't go to church, and now people say, well, I'm not a Christian, but the but leads you into actually saying, well, where are these values, about respect for others, about tolerance, about caring, compassion, love? Where do these come from? These have actually come from the Christian tradition, not always lived out properly by Christians, by all means, not always inhabited by the church. There's been a lot of cruelty and terrible things the church has done. We have to be penitent and recognise that. At the same time, the kind of stories they've told, the person we follow in Jesus and everything else, has set a pattern and a way of thinking about who we are, as how we should live as human beings, that is really rooted in people's hearts, I think, and we still walk those ways very much. So in that sense, yes, a Christian country. In terms of definite, formal signed up, tick the box kind of obedience to a particular way, perhaps not so much. And other faith communities, of course, have enriched our cultural life. But I think fundamentally, yes.
Do you think that the government should be prioritising policy that will ensure that continues to be the case?
I suppose it depends what you mean about prioritising policy. I think we need, there are big issues that we face, culturally and spiritually and every other sort of way. I mean, you might say assisted dying was one of those big issues, and there are kind of, I think, deep and profound concerns about whether we've changing the fundamental kind of contract between, ourselves and our and as society and human beings and so on. The preciousness and sacredness of life, that we understand how terrible death can be that's lived out in pain. But I think we need to be really cautious about that and not assume that somehow purely secular values are actually able to really give us the roots that we need. I think there are sort of some fundamental principles embedded that we need to hold on to. How the government inhabits that is a question we might need to continue to explore.
What's your view on the continued presence of bishops in the House of Lords?
Well, I think bishops play a role. I think the House of Lords is a very diverse institution, rightly so. It's not the legislating body in the sense of the way that Houses of Parliament are. It's in the House of Commons is, and in being democratically elected. It's got a very wide range of expertise there. I mean, the bishops are not there in one great massive block, voting through things. They contribute to the debate. They bring a perspective, whether it's a local perspective. Bishop of Peterborough is a member of the House of Lords. She will come and speak about the needs of the city, of the region, her understanding of that, which is derived not just purely from a sort of, as it were, formally religious perspective, but from being involved and engaged in the community. So I think they bring that perspective, that oversight, that contribution, and I think we are a society which needs every form of intellectual, spiritual, moral kind of perspective to be brought into that forum, really, and that reflection about the laws of the land. So I think the bishops can play an important part in that. We're not, you get some sort of nonsense talked about. It's like the Ayatollahs, running, theocracy or something. I mean, they don't have that part to play. There's two or three bishops represent the House of Bishops normally in Parliament through that mechanism. It's one voice coming into the debate, and I think it's an important voice that we hear, often representing all the faith communities, not just the Christian community. That's the Church of England's role, to represent everybody, not just a specific kind of sectarian interest.
I mean, on that line, would you support reforms to broaden the representation of other faiths or non-religious ethnical voices alongside the bishops?
Yeah, I think I would. I think the House of Lords, I'm not in favour of seeing it abolished and just purely democratically voted, because I think that's a kind of recipe for lots of career politicians to have another chance of bite of the cherry. I think the kind of breadth of the House of Lords as a kind of sort of appointed body, is great. But I mean, certainly, yes, to sort of formally acknowledge other faith communities. Many of them are actually represented. I think the chief rabbi is, and so on, have, find themselves there, but not sort of formally representative, as it were, in the same way the bishops are. But I think, yes, the king himself, talked about being, defender of faiths at one point. So I think, yes, I don't see any reason why there shouldn't be a kind of more broadly developed breadth of involvement from a whole range of people that represent the richness of our society, really.
Should the church be more vocal in its calls for political or societal change?
Well, it's interesting about how vocal the church is. How often is the church not reported when it stands up and says things? I'm on General Synod now, and I've heard, the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, Archbishop of York, in those forums make very clear, bold statements about issues as broad, as war in Europe, as the situation in Gaza, other things such as these, some more contemporary social issues in this country about refugees, asylum seekers, and so on. They say quite a lot of things. Often they're not reported, and it's often, sometimes inconvenient truths are not reported by wider media outlets. So, yes, I'm all for their voice to be heard. Sometimes they're muffled or they're silenced in a kind of subtle way.
Is it challenging for the church to be able to speak truth to power without being seen as partisan?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Very interesting question. As I say, I think the Church of England has this curious vocation, distinct vocation at its best, to be representative of all people and therefore not to be partisan in that same kind of way, not looking for its own self-interest. I mean, William Temple, who's one of my great heroes, was Archbishop of Canterbury just in the wartime, in the Second World War, had a very powerful social gospel. And he said the church is the one organisation that exists for those who are not yet its members, or even not its members. So they had a voice to speak for the voiceless and the powerless, not just for its own constituency. I think the danger for the church is, as it's kind of declined somewhat in its kind of, well-being, as it shrunk a bit, it's become more defensive of its own needs and less able to do that, but at its best, I think it continues to speak on behalf of everybody, and especially those who can't speak up for themselves, because we're embedded in every community, including some of the poorest in this country.
Have you ever felt pressure to speak on political issues, whether that's from your congregation or from within yourself?
Yeah, like I said, I might have been, in earlier days felt, called to be a political animal, and I am quite political, I think, in my sort of thinking. I was a historian, as you mentioned, so I understand the power of politics, or the importance of politics, in the sense that politics, is a moral issue. I think Archbishop Desmond Tutu, people said, his church should be interfering in politics. And he said, well, if God's rich doesn't run in politics, whose does? Kind of take that as you will. But I think, politics is a question of morality, about how we live together in community with each other, in all the broadest ways that means. It's not just a kind of funny thing we do on a Sunday in church. It's about our whole community sense of well-being, about justice, about mercy, about compassion. These are the things that we're really called to express. And where that aligns with politics, then I feel compelled to speak on that. I've recently signed a letter which was written by most of the deans of the Church of England, expressing our abhorrence really about what's going on in Gaza at the moment, and the need for hostages to be released and for violence to stop, for a ceasefire, and for a just and lasting settlement that enables all people, in the Middle East to live with dignity and decency and in safety alongside each other, not necessarily driving anybody out. So that, I'm quite powerful, quite upset about that and quite committed to speak about it. Absolutely.
Has there been an issue that you've regretted not speaking out on more strongly or more quickly over your time in the church?
That's interesting. I mean, I think sometimes you do get absorbed in, the day-to-day management of things. I can't at the moment really can't think of an issue, although I know that, there were some of the... And sometimes when there is something like that, the Middle East, where you are conscious that there are more, the perspectives are very kind of complex, where... we understand the dangers of anti-Semitism, for example, absolutely won't collude with that. So sometimes you find yourself, we better be, needing to be cautious because you don't want to damage one community by, speaking on behalf of another. I mean, I think the situation becomes so stark there now. There's no doubt about, there needs to be people speaking up for those who are, really struggling in that situation. But sometimes, yes, one can be a bit muted because you want to kind of be balanced and not kind of overplay something where you realise that there's a nuanced situation, circumstances. It's easy if you're, a pundit to kind of be full-hearted on one side. For the church, we are not party political. We're not seeking to kind of advance one party agenda. But so I think there is a nuance around all that. Sometimes makes it harder to be quite as direct as you sometimes think you might be.
Many people in modern times are disillusioned with both religion and politics. What can be done to re-engage them with public life and moral leadership?
It's really interesting. I'm involved in something here in Peterborough, Peterborough Citizens, and it's part of Citizens Organising UK. And it's really about people who with a passion and concern for civic life and for the flourishing of our civic institutions to, form alliances together across boundaries, so across faith boundaries, across, statutory sector, business, community, different voluntary organisations to come together with a voice, with a common voice about common issues of concern, and to empower people to speak into that, especially young people. I'm really in favour of the 16-year-old. I was a bit of a nerd as a teenager, so I was, quite political from quite a young age. I could have really wanted to vote from 16 in those days. I think it was, it certainly wasn't. It wasn't even 18 hardly until I can't remember now. I think I eventually was 18 by the time I voted, but. So I think we need to empower young people at an early age. Citizens is very much part of that. You've got a wonderful little primary school as one of the citizens organising groups here. We need to give a platform to our younger people early on, and for their voice to be taken seriously and not sort of poo-pooed. So I think that's one of the things that needs to be done, and I think the church can learn a lot about that as well. I keep looking at our institutions, and very often run by older people. Where do we give a voice to young people in the church? Because I think young people very often passionate about climate change. That's something we need to keep talking about. Obscured by so many other things at the moment, but young people are keen on environment, they're keen on social justice. And we need to hear those voices in all our institutions and to allow them to be, not just kind of when you're old enough.
Moving more locally and specifically where we are now, what does the cathedral mean to you personally?
Gosh, I mean, I came and fell in love with it, and it's a place that speaks so importantly to me in this city of all cities of, something about continuity, history, identity, something for the city to have, to be proud of. something to build its self-esteem. We so often say, and it's often said, that Peterborough doesn't have a high view of itself. Peterborians don't. It's a rubbish place to live. We get this sort of thing happens in, media polls and so on. For me, it's a glorious, not one of the most glamorous cities, perhaps, and the way it's grown, it's kind of grown up in the 80s. Sometimes some of the buildings are great and some of them not so great. But at the heart of it, this great cathedral sort of points, I think, to a sense of civic pride as well as spiritual guidance, as a beacon in all sorts of ways, and people, I think, are genuinely proud of the cathedral. And I want them to be. I want people to think that the cathedral is their cathedral, whoever they are. It was really interesting in our financial difficulty when we went out for appeal that it was the Muslim Council of Peterborough who came to us, to say, here's £1,000 towards your appeal. It was so generous and gracious. But a marker, I think, the fact that we're not exclusive, we're an inclusive community there for everyone. And I think the cathedral means that to people. And is something on which we can gather to build a profile for the city that's not just about advancing the status of the cathedral, but saying Peterborough has this great, extraordinary monument, building in its heart, speaking into the history of England and, a reflection of a great building with European importance. So hang on, Peterborough, this is a good place to live. Not just because of the cathedral, but actually that's just one symbol of the fact that this is not, a bad place. This is a good place. We just need to work harder to raise our own game, really.
What role does the cathedral play in life of the city beyond worship?
Well, I think, we are a great place of gathering, we're a big venue, crudely put. We've had all sorts of concerts, exhibitions, events, all those kind of things, brings people together, lowers, people, as I say, it has developed, I think, over the years, more recently, real sense of, the cathedral as everyone's cathedral. It plays, therefore, a part in the economy of the cathedral, especially the city centre. We know the city centre's troubled at the moment. It's not really flourishing in the way we want it to. That's not great for the cathedral, but it's obviously not great for the city. But, some of the things that we do here bring people into the city centre. Some of our exhibitions and, summer exhibitions have brought, thousands of visitors to come and see and say, discover, Peterborough's great. So I think we play a part as an attractor to visitors, to the visitor economy, and potentially there could be more done about that. I think we're not always as coordinated, or we don't celebrate the city together as much as we really could do. And certainly we want to play our part very much in that, working with other partners across the city, to advance the kind of story and the narrative of Peterborough. So I think we have a very practical way in which we do stuff, but also there's a vision for the future as well.
Is there a particular local issue where you feel the cathedral could do more, or is seeking to expand its influence?
Well, we're really trying to begin to build a bit more on our on some of the cultural stuff here. I know there's cultural alliances beginning to develop. We've probably not been as engaged in that as probably we might need to be. I'm just looking at emails so I haven't answered recently for one reason or another. But I think there's a real place to play in sharing with partners in that respect. We have this kind of ambition to make something more of our music. We have this glorious musical tradition, junior choirs, young choir choristers, 50 young people plus others who get involved in singing and have a musical education. How can we make that more a part of the wider city, not just to kind of do wonderful worship here when people experience it, but also to kind of animate others around the city in that. We've got some ambition to do that. Of course, it takes investment, but I think it's an area where we could grow, and where the love of music and singing is something that so liberates people. It's a spiritual thing in its own right, and there's more we can do about that. And I think that's one of our ambitions in the long term.
Now, as you touched on earlier, Peterborough is a diverse and growing city. Firstly, how does the cathedral engage with that diversity? And secondly, have there been any challenges or lessons in building trust across the different communities in the city?
Oh, well, I mean, we certainly try to be embedded across the city in all sorts of cross-community things, both with other churches, but also, as I say, with other communities. I mentioned citizens earlier. That's one of the areas that we're involved in. One of my colleagues is very much engaged in the interfaith work with other faith communities across the city. We worked to support those situations when there's been threats to the city, as there were with the Southport riots and so on, and killings, to stand together with our sisters and brothers of other faith communities. We really visibly do that. We work closely with the City Council as much as we possibly can. We have very good, strong working relationships with them. We're working with the university, which is just our next door neighbour, and I think building all those kind of connections with Neame Park Trust and so on, building these kind of connections across the city, working really hard to try and animate those within the resources that we have at our disposal. I think all those things are really important about, I say, getting a coherent voice for Peterborough, which needs to speak more with one voice than it has done.
Is there an argument to be made that the cathedral may be holding the development of the city back in terms of the planning requirements around sightlines to the cathedral?
I hope not. I think there is something really special about the visibility of the cathedral. I know something about the, building high-rise blocks all the way around the place. There are glimpses you get at the cathedral as you come, whether it's on, going past Frank Perkins or on the railway line. These things are what entice people into cities. I think there are plenty of really mundane cities with lots of tower blocks. There are not plenty of places that have one of the great Norman buildings of England. Keep some of those sight lines going, entice people. They've done it even in the city of London. St Paul's Cathedral, it remains a visible presence because they've maintained that, even with all those great tower blocks going up. You go to Paris, the centre of Paris is not overdeveloped with high-rise buildings. I don't think we need necessarily to go that high right in the centre in order to build and develop the city. So yeah, I'd want to kind of defend that a little bit, as you might expect, perhaps.
In January of this year, a fundraiser was launched for £300,000, without which the cathedral's future as a 7-day-a-week operation was at threat. What are the main factors that have contributed to the current financial challenges facing the cathedral?
Gosh, I mean, it's a struggle. It's to be open every day. I mean, it's got to be safe. It's got to be insured. It's got to be staffed. That means paying wages. It means paying people all the time, really. So I mean, that is. We don't have a massively great staff. We have lots of volunteers who come. We couldn't do anything of the sort that we do without all the volunteers who help. Even paying all those wages, the utility bills that it costs to even begin to kind of take the edge off the cold in the cathedral itself and some of the other buildings, sustaining and developing this whole precinct, as there's the beautiful gardens that we have, that we're trying to sustain on behalf of the city as a green breathing space right at the centre, the maintenance of the historic sort of structures around the place. All this doesn't come cheap. It's a really expensive thing. We don't get government support for that. We don't get much central funding from the Church of England, which has many other demands on its time and money. So most of that is, we're, as it were, an independent charity having to meet those various needs. Costs of employment keep going up. So all in all, though we're working hard at developing revenue streams, it's not easy to keep abreast of those rising costs, which everybody, other business and other institution has as well, especially in the heritage sector, where kind of, as it were, not the first essential need. People will buy their food before they'll come and give a donation to the cathedral, for example, not surprisingly. So, yeah, it's a challenge, and we don't have many mechanisms that we can deploy to make extra revenue come in to keep the place paid for and open.
On that topic, what steps are being taken or considered to increase the income or reduce the costs?
Yeah, well, we're working hard to reposition ourselves, perhaps our cafe. That's not already been terribly successful. That will be. We hope we can have a beautiful cafe which will bring in visitors, attract people, raise some revenue. We've repurposed some of our buildings quite recently to be conference centre. It's a lovely space to come, to get away. So we're trying to work and develop a model for businesses or other institutions to come and use some of those buildings in that way. And obviously we can generate revenue from that. We are exploring, we are challenged about what can we do to add value to people's visits if they come to the cathedral. We don't want to charge entry at the door at the moment, but we are thinking, are there other ways in which we can, attract people to contribute more consciously to other aspects of seeing parts of the cathedral, whether Catherine of Aragon's tomb, high-level tours, extraordinary tours up into the to the tower and so on. All these things may be ways in which we can generate some more revenue. People often, are generous. Some people are very generous who come. Some people perhaps take it for granted. We perhaps do need to kind of remind people that we're not going to be here necessarily forever unless people do take seriously the challenge of maintaining a building like this in a community like this.
Back in 2016, the then Bishop of Peterborough, the Right Reverend Donald Allister, said that the cathedral was struggling to pay the bills and staff wages on time. The then Dean, the Very Reverend Charles Taylor, said that new structures and strategies were being put in place to meet the short, medium and long-term sustainability. Why 9 years later are things no better than they were?
Back then, things were actually more serious, much more serious than people actually realised. And there was a crash in 2016 which left us laden with something like £3.5 million worth of debt. We've sacrificially paid all that down, using every last penny that we could, selling off bits of property and so on. That has gone. That no longer overshadows us in the way it did. So our real challenge now is the operating costs week by week, year by year. And the gap is narrowed, but it's still a challenging, it's more than 1,000 or two. It's a bigger gap. We have no reserves, so that doesn't give us much money to invest for things that might need to, as I was mentioning, the cafe or the conference centre. We don't have much money to invest to make those better, to make those more attractive. So we're constantly kind of, having to negotiate on a very narrow pathway. And basically, and I think everybody else knows, the economy has not flourished. The Peterborough city centre is not flourishing at the moment. We hope it will re-engage. We rely on visitors coming, footfall, all those kind of things. Those challenges remain quite significant. So we're in a much better, more secure place than we were back in those days, but we're not there yet.
With an increasing number of events taking place in and around the cathedral, such as the dinosaur event, Christmas light show, is there any risk that the cathedral could lose sight of its core purpose under its financial pressures?
It's a really good question, and I know that some people feel, yes, will you lose your soul in the process? On the whole, I think we're trying to get that balance right. I think it's really important that we don't have a kind of elitist view about what the cathedral is, and some of these events and activities bring people across the threshold and give them a glimpse of glory through the building. Now you may think, well, if you're coming to an ABBA concert, is that a glimpse of glory or not? I don't know. Some people will both, the context does affect the way that people feel when they come into this building. That said, you're absolutely right, and there is always a balance to be drawn about commercialisation and retaining that kind of aura of a place that's fundamentally about prayer and worship, a sanctuary, a place of peace. And when we're having a set-up for a concert or something and it's clanging and banging, it doesn't feel quite the same. So do I lose sleep about it? Not quite that, but I certainly... I think it's something we have to keep really, really under review. And every event we put on, we do review about, is this consonant with our, core purpose and so on. So, it's a challenge. I don't deny that, But if somebody were to resolve our financial situation overnight and leave us 50 million or something, we'd be, we could be more, we could be. But I don't really want to do that. I don't really want to stop being a place which people can feel they can come to and which we can engage with them in and we can meet people. And sometimes those conversations, those exhibitions give you an opportunity for a conversation with people who'd never otherwise come to church, sometimes about really profound, important moral issues that maybe they would never think to have a conversation about otherwise. And I can just bump into them when they're coming to look at a dinosaur or something and say, well, what's all this about? So yeah, I'm a bit unrepentant about that, but we do need to be cautious not to lose our soul in the process.
Has there been sufficient support from the Church of England, local government or other institutions to help address the financial situation?
We always love to have more. Of course we would. But you look at all these institutions all have their own big challenges, don't they? I mean, we know our city council is really struggling to meet the need. And we're in conversation with Cambridgeshire about some of the grants, some of the pots of money that occasionally come our way, and we will fly the flag for the cathedral in all that, pointing out what, as we've been saying earlier, what our role is in the identity and the well-being of the city. With the national church, there is support for certain kind of project works that come along. But there are also huge demands, as I say, on the whole Church of England. So that it looks like a wealthy institution. It's kind of often a situation of asset rich and cash poor, and a lot of demand on clergy payment, stipends, pensions, and all of that. So I'm not going to go saying somebody else has got to sort this out for us. We've got to work our own destiny here in our own city to a large extent. Sugar daddies are not necessarily going to come and give us all the solution to all our problems. We've got to really work that out. What do we really want for this place? Do we want it to flourish? Do we want it to be here, survive, be a beacon of hope and light, joy and celebration for the future, or not? And in some ways it's in our own hands.
What role can the people of Peterborough play in supporting the cathedral during these times?
Well, please, do visit, do come, do pass the message on, do encourage others to visit. I mean, yes, any financial support we do get, is more than welcome. As I say, it's in our own hands, I said earlier. I'm going to qualify that by saying this is all in God's hands. In the end, if God wants us to flourish, we will. But the people of Peterborough, working with us, aligning with us, I think having a realistic sense of what the cathedral both is for everybody, that everybody is welcome, and to share and join with us, not to kind of just sit at a distance, but to kind of engage with us, come to the things that we do, and recognise that the challenge we have is to be here for everyone, and come and explore the place, come and delight in it. It's here for you.
What do you hope that Peterborough Cathedral will be known for in 10 years' time?
Well, I hope that we will be known for the fact that we've worked through some of our challenges and are in a more stable and consistently, healthy situation, that we have continued to become a place that's at the forefront of exploring with our community, what it means to be a good city. I think that's what I'd really love to. That keep coming back to me recently. What is it to be a good city? Not kind of just financially or any other way, but that's a sense of a holistic place where we can work together, where we have a vision of a community that is at peace with each other, where there is opportunity for people. Can we play our part in that? And I'd like to think that the cathedral could be part of that sort of sense of, a city where culture is valued, where spirituality is valued, where people have opportunities for work and employment, that perhaps the cathedral is a place where skills, we need to do more work on our buildings, perhaps we've had another aspiration to do something a bit more about heritage skills and how we repair our building. It's always a costly thing, but if we could, have apprentices here, perhaps, who could working on an historic building and bringing that ancient art into the future development of our city and our region, that would be a great thing to do as well, wouldn't it?
Looking back over your 40 years in the church, what have you learned about leadership and service?
Oh, gosh, what a big question. It's been a long and challenging journey. And I was probably very naive when I set off. Like most people, sort all these problems out. I'm God's gift to the church. I hope I never felt that, but God certainly called me. I've learned a lot about the need for collegiality, for cooperation, for making collective decisions. There are times when when leadership has to be directive and you have to say, here's what we're going to do. But for most of that, you have to really seek to build consensus, to build alliances. You can see that in whether it be in local politics, national politics. Things really work when people speak, listen, attend, and support one another in coming up to a common shared solution for things. I think that's probably the biggest lesson. Not be too proud for oneself or one's own aspirations. I've always thought it'd be great to have lots of colleagues who are better at me than everything, other than just kind of pulling the thing together. I'm not kind of expecting to be the most brilliant person in everything. We can't be. None of us can be. It's about how you coordinate, and work collaboratively.
When your time as Dean in Peterborough comes to an end, what do you hope your legacy will be?
Well, as I say, I hope that I will have brought some stability to the place, some new shape and direction to the cathedral's mission and ministry, that people will feel, that at the very least that I've done my bit. I was talking to our team the other day and saying we're just stewards of a place for a season, and I will be a name on the board in 50 years' time. People say, I wonder what he did, and largely that's I'm not expecting to have plaudits forever, or like Dean Ingram, I think you mentioned when we were having a conversation earlier, memorialised on the west front of the cathedral. I'm here just to do my part in handing the cathedral from one generation to the next, as people before me have done. That's all. If I can do that and ensure that the cathedral is still flourishing as best it can, then I will be glad that I've done a piece of work for a time.
What advice would you give to anyone, particularly young people, thinking about public service, whether that be faith-based or secular?
Well, I think try stuff out as well. We have lots of things like, internships available. Perhaps have a gap year before you go off to start earning money or whatever. Just go and explore what might be available. One thing I have learned is that, it's a long run. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It can seem when you get towards the end, more the latter part of your life, that gosh, has that all happened so quickly? But actually, you've got time. Take the time to really go and explore things and options. Perhaps have an internship, whatever. Come and spend some months at the cathedral. We can, as a volunteer.
What one message would you give to political leaders, both local and national?
I think the message has to be surely, listen carefully, rather than try and necessarily direct stuff too much. We quite often think we've heard, we know what we want to hear. Actually listen more attentively to what people are really saying.
Now, as always on the podcast, we like to finish with some quick-fire questions. If you had gone into politics, what would have been your ideal government role?
Foreign Secretary.
What one word would your friends use to describe you?
Loyal.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Norwich City. Well, it's not really a pleasure. Yes, long-term Norwich City supporter. Painful, really, but anyway, it's a sort of pleasure.
What's your favourite quiet spot in the city?
Well, obviously, apart from the cathedral at 7 o'clock in the morning, I suppose by the river, somewhere by the river, walking along towards Neen Park, somewhere in that place with the swans nest, perhaps.
One person, living or dead, who you'd love to share a coffee with?
One person, living or dead. I'd love to share a coffee with Thomas Traherne, priest poet of the 17th century, not so well known, but a beautiful writer, and who saw the world through, as he saw the eyes of a child, as a beautiful, glorious gift.
Favourite book?
Favourite book? This changes a lot, but probably I'm quite into poetry, and so I think T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, those poems, it's a kind of quite a lengthy poem, just speaks so profoundly to me about journey of life and meaning, and that everything is enfolded in the love of God. Best
piece of advice you ever received?
The best piece of advice, don't give up. My dad always used to say this. We don't give up. Dallistons don't give up. So I'm very, very, very consistent, and I keep going. And I don't take. I don't. Look for a new solution. You persist. You'll find the solution if you keep going.
And finally, what gives you hope on a difficult day?
This has to be my faith. I believe that. As a historian and as a person of faith, it's the long picture. Don't get too caught up in the weeds of the moment. Don't. See the future. The future will always offer new opportunities and possibilities. You may not see them at the moment, but they're there.
Reverend Chris Dalliston, thank you for joining me on the Politics of Peterborough.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to the Very Reverend Chris Dalliston for joining me. The Reverend doesn't really do social media, but you can follow the goings-on at the Cathedral on Facebook and on X at PBORO Cathedral. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so that you get each episode as soon as it's released. You can find us on X and Facebook at PoliticsPBORO. Please let me know what you thought of the episode. If you have any suggestions as to who you'd like to hear on the show, or any questions you'd like me to put to our guests, you can email me at politics.peterborough@hotmail.com. This episode of the Politics of Peterborough was created, hosted, recorded and edited by me. I'll see you next time.